Let me begin by saying I'm so happy again to be joined by Reverend Stephanie Duzant, all the way out in Nevada, 2 different time zones. It's so nice that we can get together by Zoom. Let me just share now. We have a resource. So in the ELCA, we have this resource where we make social statements.
Right.
So social statements are commissioned. A national assembly, which we call our churchwide assembly, says we need a statement on this. And because that is commissioned, then a task force is put together. And then there are hearings and there are drafts. So this is the social statement that was made on abortion, which was one of the earliest ones that the ELCA made. So this is 1991, which is a good while ago now. So there's a summary here. So I think what this tries to do is it tries to avoid some of the extreme opposite positions. So it says, they want to affirm and support life. They want to reduce the number of unintended pregnancies. So the statement reminds the church to be compassionate. The church encourages women with unintended pregnancies to continue pregnancy. So it's trying to take this idea that abortion is a last resort, that they don't want it necessarily to be harshly regulated. But while we don't want the government regulating it, that maybe from a church point of view, we want to help people to avoid abortion. So this is kind of a summary. Regulation of abortion is where members of the church disagree widely. So we have to, we come from these conservative traditions or we're in a liberal tradition. Whatever congregation we're in, we're going to have people on opposite sides of this issue.
Right.
So they make a statement that says, because of our conviction that both the life of the woman and the life of the womb must be respected by law, the church opposes a lack of regulation on abortion. So can there be some regulation on abortion? It shouldn't be interfering with women's rights, but can there be some regulation? The church is opposed to legislation that would outlaw abortion in all circumstances. The church opposes laws that prevent access to information about all options available to women. We know that internationally, the United States won't fund efforts to tell women about their alternatives.
Right.
The church opposes mandatory or coerced abortion or sterilization, which is the other side of this, is that there have been women who have been forced to be sterilized and forced to have abortions. So it's not about whether or not to have an abortion as to who gets to decide it, because the decision goes both ways in people deciding for women. The church is opposed to laws that prevent couples from practicing contraception. There are still companies that don't want to allow health insurance to cover contraceptions for people. The church opposes laws that are primarily intended to harass those contemplating or deciding for an abortion. And I think that's where Texas comes in, is that they just want these vigilantes going on and on, interfering with people's ability to do what they want.
Can you imagine you pay somebody to report that somebody's having an abortion?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And a waste of money.
Yeah. And there's always been this radical element that was bombing clinics and harassing doctors. There's nothing more difficult in the medical profession than trying to run a clinic where people can go and get reproductive services, because sometimes you're taking your own life into your hand, that some radical is going to show up and try to hurt you.
Right.
Or that people are going to be protesting outside and nobody feels safe crossing that line of protesters.
Right.
So I'm wondering, this is quite old now, 1991, in terms of all the things that have happened politically. I mean, this is before marriage equality, and look at all the advances we've made in social circumstances. I think women's rights. I think it's been very uneven and it's very much back and forth or whatever. But so the idea that the church opposes a lack of regulation. So the church is in favor of some regulation. I'm wondering if that's outdated, or is that still a good concept?
I'm a person that really believes in the separation of church and state. And I think that the church's position should be to speak to issues in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But anything that infringes on anyone's ability to make personal choices for their lives,
Mm-hmm.
that don't harm community,
Mm-hmm.
that don't harm anybody else, just a personal choice for their life. The church doesn't have a say on that. That's just my position on it. And the church shouldn't be trying to have a say on that. It's out, even Jesus didn't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't heal anybody who didn't want to be healed, right? Mm-hmm. Many times when we read the Bible, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be well?
Mm-hmm.
It was always a choice that you could make.
Mm-hmm.
And so when do we stop letting people make a choice? The church's response should be to whatever choice was made.
Yeah.
Right? Not to you have to do this or you have to do that. That's not our position.
Mm-hmm. So the social statement tries to say, that the church is not opposed to regulation. I guess because some people become such purists ideologically that, they want this to be an absolute right. And so what Roe v. Wade is based on is the right to privacy, which is based on the 14th Amendment. So the Supreme Court did not say there's an absolute right. It gives you differences by trimester and whatnot, saying that the state can regulate, based on, scientific evidence as to when's, what's appropriate to different times. It kind of reminds me of when a lot of churches were debating gay marriage, we had that debate, 20 years ago now.
And AME Church was still having that debate.
Yeah. So on a policy level, we've settled it, even though it's still there's still differences. But back when that debate was going on, there were people who would say God doesn't care about what happens in the bedroom, and I would say I think God cares about what happens in the bedroom. I think God doesn't want us to say, you have to be different genders or whatever. But God doesn't want people to be coerced into sex. God doesn't want incest to be happening. God doesn't want people to be raped. Within marriage, without of marriage, there should be consent. It's a sacred act. To say that God doesn't care about that, as if to say, let's not talk about it, let's hide it, it's shameful. Don't get involved in it. Don't infringe on it. Leave it out of view, out of public sight or whatever. So this idea that, we don't want there to be a lack of regulation. We think that government can regulate certain things that are important for the common good.
I think it has to be, any regulation has to be about harm, about danger, right? Just like you say with the sexuality piece, with the marriage or LGBT, nobody should be engaging without consent to do no harm.
Yeah.
But this whole notion of the fetus being a live entity, it always takes me back to the scripture. How can you believe in a God you don't see? How can you love a God you don't see, but you don't love your fellow brother, sister who you do see? Of course, my own personal stance is that it is life, right? But you so concerned about a fetus, and you're not concerned about the person who's carrying the fetus.
Yeah,
you're not even concerned about what kind of world the fetus is going to come into. What's the circumstance around the fetus? You're not concerned about all the other children that were born who are in foster care, who are homeless, who have physical and mental conditions that nobody is really caring about on a large scale. And so that if you're going to be pro-life, how far are you going to take this pro-life?
Those people are pro-birth.
Exactly. You're not pro-life. You're pro-birth. And that's a problem. And that's a problem.
There's also been a lot of histories that have been written that are quite interesting in terms of looking back at the 1970s and seeing that, in the 60s and 70s, people were running for office on a segregation platform.
Right.
You had people running for president, you had people running for governor, you had people running for Senate as segregationists.
Right.
And then as the 70s started, they were like, well, we can't do that anymore. We can't be segregationists. Right. So they may have had 20 years of running as a segregationist, but now they couldn't anymore. And so there's been a couple of people who've made the case, and I find it compelling, that those people decided that they were pro-life. And that they couldn't publicly, you know, march behind the Confederate flag, but they were going to march behind a pro-life
flag.
Yeah.
Right. But how you know, when I read up on this, how evil is that?
Mm-hmm.
The mindset that we're going to develop a position that will draw people in, people who we want to be segregated from, people who we really don't care about, people who we know are using this same position to oppress people. And we're going to use this so that we can continue our own segregated and racist behaviors and living social dynamics.
There was a program on NPR yesterday talking about Doctors Without Borders. So, you know, to kind of look at the other side, you know, the liberals, the people who are pro-choice or whatever, you know, people who care about the third world. So Doctors Without Borders, they were saying it's basically been a model of white European doctors going and helping people of color. And Doctors Without Borders, you know, most people think that, you know, what could be a better charity than Doctors Without Borders? And you can't say that they're not doing good work.
Right.
The way they treat the local people who they employ and the way they treat the international people that they employ, you know, there's a big discrepancy there. There's a lot of inequity there. And so Doctors Without Borders and lots of humanitarian organizations have had to be confronted with the idea that they have a European model of charity, you know, individuals giving money for individuals to voluntarily go, as opposed to, you know, some kind of reparations or something that would, you know, make the situation better overall. Right. Instead of saying we need to continue white charity to these countries. So that was something I hadn't heard before. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like all the missionary trips to Haiti.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be advertised, you know, you could take a missionary vacation.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Yeah.
You know, and so instead of, how about I give the money, like you say, let's help to reconstruct Haiti, to build back its infrastructure. Yeah. But no, I'll use it and we'll go on these missionary vacations and help all the poor Haitians and feel good about ourselves. It's ridiculous.
On Sunday, I had to talk about, you know, the Haitians at the border and just those images that we had to see this past week.
Right.
Of cowboys, you know, government employees, cowboys on horses with ropes and with whips after people who, you know, these people are fleeing desperate poverty and violence. They've got a plastic bag in one hand and they've got a baby on their shoulder, and all we can think is that we need, you know, to scare these people away. Right.
But and at a time when we're taking in Afghanistan refugees, as we should, right?
Yeah.
But we don't look at the role that America played in the deconstruction of Haitian society to get to where it is, right? And so,
is it Paul Farmer has the book The Uses of Haiti that gives a whole history of America's involvement in Haiti?
Right.
He comes from a medical point of view.
Well, but government part of view, will we own, you know, the middle of America if it wasn't for the Haitians helping America to fight against France? And so we're not looking at the full historical view, right? We're not looking at the reparations that Haiti was forced to pay France and that America bullied them into paying, right? We're not looking at the occupation of America and Haiti. We're not looking at that in the early 20th century. We're not looking at that. And so I think bringing it back to the abortion issue. We're not looking at the historical purview of abortion in this country and what it did to the country when it was illegal. Is that Lorna? Hi, Lorna.
Bringing me lunch? Oh, look at this. Thank you.
Hi, Stephanie.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. I'm good.
I was just going to say that I was talking to a friend about The Handmaid's Tale, Atwood, and I think it's an example. Thank you. I think it's an example of science fiction that, you know, has a point, and that's even actually got historical references. So this friend of mine was saying, you know, The Handmaid's Tale, that's about the Taliban, because that's the way the Taliban treats people. You know, there's something about the Taliban won't allow people to get their beards trimmed today. And of course, girls are being harassed at schools and whatnot. And I don't know why that stuck in my head, but that stuck in my head for days. And then finally it came to me, it's about America. America has captured people and imprisoned people for their life.
That's right.
America has forcibly raped those people. In America, those people, you know, they've been separated from their families.
That's right.
So The Handmaid's Tale is science fiction in a sense, but it's also showing you exactly what's been happening for most of Americans' history. It's shocking because they're white women.
Right.
And you're thinking, oh my God, how could they do this to these women?
Right.
But the history is that we've done that throughout history.
We've done that. Right. Right. That we've done that. And people need to know. And I want to say too, this whole abortion, the anti-abortion, when I was a social worker in child welfare, my coworkers, you know, would say, really? I said, you know, I'm worried more for my white clients around this racist policies because their parents get away with harming them. Their parents get away with, you know, beating them and torturing them and then crying. You know, and the children are in danger.
Yeah.
The children are in danger. And so we look at this
anti-abortion. The white privilege of the parents protects them.
The white privilege of the parents, exactly. The white privilege of the parents. Yeah. And the children become in danger. Right? And so this anti-abortion law, I don't really think they really want to admit that they're putting their own community, women in their community, and maybe they don't care because they are looking for a more patriarchal society anyway. But just the other day I was reading anonymous tales of women from the right who had to sneak and have abortions. And so they're not looking at these abortions are not going to stop. In that paper I wrote 20 years ago, many of the stories were white women. These abortions are not going to stop. Making these laws is not going to make abortion go away, you know, and it's going to affect the white privilege. Yeah. I feel even more so.
The other thing about the Handmaid's Tale is that, you know, the role of religion in that whole story, to make people think that what's wrong is right.
Exactly.
And what's evil is good. To make people think that, you know, for these women to be treated this way, to be submissive is godly. You know, that idea of that language being used to sanction slavery, to sanction colonialism, to sanction patriarchy.
Right.
It's something
that goes back to the church's poor interpretation and not enough churches correcting that wrong.
Yeah.
Not enough churches really pushing a true exegesis of the text to show what Jesus was really about. I mean, Jesus wouldn't have a ministry if it wasn't for women.
I posted something this morning. Do the stories of the Bible condone bad behavior? You know, the stories about war, the stories about slavery, the stories about polygamy. And let's see, I've got two responses here. The first one was, no, They instruct people how to elevate one's thought, to progress from action to do what is right and good. God is forgiving and loving God. God destroys the sin by elevating our thinking. So that's someone saying how they interpret those stories. It's not saying the stories, on their face.
Right.
Because I think people can open up those stories and use them to sanction war and slavery and patriarchal oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 weeks ago, the reading in the narrative lectionary was supposed to be the binding of Isaac. And I said, I'm not going to read this story. I can't adequately talk about the binding of Isaac in a worship service that's an hour long and make sure that everyone's understood what that story, that can't be a Sunday morning story. That could be for an advanced course to try to figure that out. So I skipped a couple of verses and I went to the story of Hagar and Ishmael. And I started, I showed this story to people and I, in the worship service, and I said, is the Bible told from the point of view of the slave owner or from the enslaved person?
That's right.
Because I think a lot of us in a European Christian tradition have thought that it was from the point of view of the slave owner.
Of course.
And when you're reading the story of Hagar, you're like, well, it's not just that point of view. We also have this point of view, which probably doesn't get read half as much as the binding of Isaac, which, traumatizes half of us. But so is the Bible told from the point of view of the slave owner or the enslaved person? I guess it's both in some sense, right? But you're trying to figure out where God's position is in that. So to place yourself and to realize how you've been placed.
Right. I always ask people, who are you in this story?
Yeah.
Who are you? Are you Hagar?
Yeah.
Are you Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
Are you Abraham?
Yeah.
Who are you in this story? And so, when you recognize, sometimes I am the Roman soldier.
Mm-hmm.
That really messed with me when I, when I realized that I'm the Roman soldier because I work for child welfare, right? And I have held laws that sometimes were oppressive, and so this is why the Gospel of Luke really helped me through, because there's room for everybody at the table, as long as you are righteous, right? But you have to admit who you are and then make your decision, right? You have to admit, and then you have to, I think also too, we have to say that the Bible can be problematic in some space. Judges 19. Ain't nothing good about that story. There's nothing good about Judges 19.
You're talking about the rape?
Huh?
Is that the one with the rape you're talking about?
What, right, with the concubine and the rape and I mean, reading that, the first time I heard it preached was the late Robina Wimbush. She preached it, and it opened my eyes so much. But also, then I became a social worker, and to read it from a perspective of domestic violence.
Yeah.
She runs away, goes to her father, and the father tries to delay that her leaving with her husband when the husband comes back to get her.
Yeah.
And the father tries to delay, but he can't delay any longer because the husband is now adamant, we gotta go.
Yeah.
And so they get to the town, and he, you gotta say, what kind of joker is this guy? He, somebody comes and tells him, listen, don't sleep outside. We're gonna sleep outside. They're like, no, listen, no, really, let's not sleep outside. So they goes to the home with the person, and here comes the town people to rape him, right? To rape him. And the person who brings him in offers up his daughters.
Yeah.
What kind of person are you? Okay. And so the people refuse. And so they push the concubine out. They push her out, and she's raped to death, right? And he kicks her body, get up. She doesn't get up. He puts her body on the horse, and they go home, and he cuts her body into 12 pieces because he's been offended. Because he's been offended. What good is in that story? Right? And then it took Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart to preach. I heard her preach, and she said, God is not in this story. I was like, whoa. God is not in this story. Notice that there's no mention of God in this story. Sometimes the Bible is problematic.
So we have to place ourselves, and then we also have to realize that we can place other people too. This is my position, but then there are other valid positions.
Right.
And it shouldn't just be about my position in the story. It should be about all the positions in the story.
All the positions in the story.
So Reverend Stephanie, I want to thank you so much for this time. I don't want to take too much of your time. And I'm sure you've got a lot of good work that you have to do today.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that things are a little bit better, and I hope that things continue to get better.
Yeah. Thank you.
By God's grace, we're going to be living in a world where we can get together more easily.
That's our prayer.
Yeah.
That's our prayer. But I'm, glad to see you, and I'm keeping you in the church and the daycare in my prayers. Especially what happened with Hurricane Ida. I felt for my New York family.
We got water downstairs, and it just took days to clean the place up. But
yeah,
people, this area, Rybrook and Rye and Harrison, there were people who just lost entire businesses.
Yeah,
People who lost entire apartments. People were just wiped out. Who weren't wiped out by Sandy or any of those other coastal hurricanes, but this coming down out of the sky, it just hit people who'd never been hit by a hurricane before.
Yeah. So the loss of life in my old community was so tragic,
Yeah. New Jersey and places where you live in basement apartments. That was you couldn't get out fast enough.
The power of water, the power of rain, the power of nature.
Yeah.
So I'm praying that in all of these things that we recognize that global warming is real, that we have to do something about environmental health.
Yeah.
We got to tackle these, instead of trying to control people, let's come together and for the good of the world.
Yeah, for the sake of the world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Reverend Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor.
God bless you and your family.
Thank you. Same to you. God bless you all. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.